Hey there, Because I'm Carlos podcast number 19. Been a little while since the last episode, but as promised, I try to stick to episodes only when I feel that it fits this format the best. If any of you have been following the YouTube channel, then there's been plenty of content going on the whole last little while, especially the last couple of months. The last couple of months, honestly, has been some of the more successful on the YouTube channel's history. So I'm very thankful to the folks who have been checking out the channel and enjoying it for what it is. But this particular episode, I think, fits very well for the audio only format because really I have no visual aids here to show you, and there's nothing in particular that I need to put on the screen. So in this case, we're just going to talk through a little something that I've been observing, especially a little bit lately, and it hasn't been very surprising. I'm not going to lie to you. A lot of it really comes down to when a market kind of takes a downturn or slows down, then everybody and their brother suddenly becomes an expert in trying to diagnose it, try to figure out what needs to be done about it, or they get really, really quiet. And that's kind of been one of the enjoyable things for me watching the contrast in the folks that suddenly get a little bit quiet because suddenly they don't have anything to talk about when things aren't all firing on all cylinders. And the other side of it is the folks who are trying to explain it or give, advice on what to do now that, things have quote unquote, slowed down to such a degree. And they have, like, let's be objective about it. Definitely, and especially compared to the boom period that came out of the beginning of the pandemic and leading into probably well over a year of very consistent highs. But if anybody does any real analysis, what they find is that the high end is still doing fairly well in a lot of cases, and it's kind of a case by case basis. But there's a lot going on, and even as I'm speaking right now, there are world events, a lot of potential financial factors that are going to play into what people do going forward for the next little while, as well as also really simply, a baseball lockout right now. So for that particular market, normally the end of the football season would lead into baseball. So there's a lot going on in a lot of these different things. But none of that is really what I wanted to focus on in this podcast, but I just wanted to kind of put it into a greater context. Given the time period that I'm recording this, there are a lot of things going on. That's really my main point. There's a lot of things going on and a lot of reasons why people would want to try to diagnose or try to figure out what to do or how to react, and of course make prognostications both positive and negative for different agendas or different reasons. My thought process on it, as far as this is concerned, has been in my observation of the content side of things. And one of the areas that I've kind of paid close attention to is both the prevalence and the reaction to a couple of categories that have done, reasonably well in the last little while. And the examples I'm going to use are going to be the Marvel cards. And then also there's been F1 and other things like that as well. But the Marvel cards, I think, are a good area to focus in on this one. And really, what it comes down to is those particular sets of cards and that genre of cards have certainly taken off quite a bit. And part of that is because for a long time they were relatively low relative to a lot of other categories. But one of the things that I've discussed regularly on the channel and on the live stream is that a lot of times money was looking for different areas to jump into. When things got really expensive, one category, they jumped to another one. They jumped to another one. They jumped to another one. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't some organic desire for these things or an increase in organic demand. But the question always becomes, right? What is the actual percentage of this increase that is organic demand versus what percentage of it is pertaining to influencers and people, encouraging people into these categories? And I'll also toss in another category for you, and I'll use it as an example of something that I've talked about a little bit on the channel, but something that I haven't focused on too much. And that is a slow growth in the area of wrestling cards. Now, again, in the same vein, it's an entertainment product. It's a category that for many years was relatively neglected. And now we've got some record sales coming up in that category, and we've got folks talking about that. It's like, oh, is that another area that, people can be looking into? So I kind of want to put this all together in one specific discussion. And like a lot of these, it's a little bit too complicated. It's relatively nuanced. It's not something that we'll be able to get through in a satisfactory manner in one simple discussion. However, that doesn't mean we can't at least have a surface discussion on it. So really what it comes down to is this. In all these categories I've mentioned, in the Marvel cards, in the wrestling cards, and even the F1 cards, if you really want to go that far, we'll use those three and stick to that. But in any of these categories, do I believe that there has been an organic increase in the demand for these types of cards? My answer is yes. I do believe there has been, because simply by making people aware of it does mean that there are going to be some folks that may be interested in it and have some interest in it and be able to look at it from the perspective of wanting to have it. There's also going to be folks that are going to sense an opportunity. So from their perspective, it is organic demand in the sense that they sense an opportunity. I know people don't like to put those two things together, but they actually are together. Demand is demand. I literally made a video titled that. Demand is demand because it means that when you're a seller, I don't care why you're buying it. If you are willing to pay the price that I would like you to pay, or you're willing to pay the market rate and the market rate steadily goes up over time, I'm not sitting there taking an exit survey trying to figure out, so when you buy this card from me, what is your intention? What is your plan? And that has always been the case. And it's one of those things where I find it very interesting that people suddenly get really obsessive about the rationale for it. I'll give you a quick concrete example from the sports card realm, and it's from something recent that I sold. I've over the last maybe couple of months, I occasionally will put up a couple of cards up for sale on eBay. Not really too much, mostly out of laziness. Honestly, I get kind of lazy as far as taking the proper images and listing it and doing all that stuff. But I will put a couple of cards up here and there. And when I get a chance to sell a few of them off, it's usually either some duplicates from the Medano collection or some baseball cards that I have, or maybe a couple of football cards here and there. I've got a couple of different categories, and I've been able to sell a couple of different ones throughout the last couple of months. But three of them in particular were Medano duplicates that I had. So they were like these patch autographs that I had other copies of in the collection. And what I did is I found a better version of the patch. I upgraded the patch. So now I suddenly had two of them. So I put the other one up on eBay. Well, in all three instances over the last several months, the same bidder has bid on all three of them. And here's the thing, because I know it's the same bidder in all three cases, I recognize the name that of the bidder of those auctions. And here's what happened. In two out of the three cases so far. The third one, I haven't seen if it's going to happen yet, but I suspect it will. Well, as it turns out, that seller is somebody who does sell quite a number of patch autographs and patch cards and stuff like that, including Mike Medano patch cards, because I've seen some that they have up for sale that are kind of on the expensive side. Well, here's the funny thing. Two of those ones that I'm talking about, they were purchased from me at what I felt was a fair price, where I honestly made some money, full disclosure. But they purchased them from me, and they paid a good strong amount for both of those, more than what I paid for them. And then they listed them up very quickly thereafter with a significant 30, 40, 50% markup. And so clearly, you can probably make out from that, why did they buy it? Because their intention was to resell. They felt that they could get more money for it themselves. Now, to this date, they haven't sold the two of them that I've seen, and they purchased a third from me only a couple of weeks ago. So we'll see if they end up putting that one up on eBay and if it ends up selling. And, I wish them the best of luck because, like I said, once it's out of my possession and you've paid and the transaction is complete, I really don't care why. That's not my concern. That's really up to you to figure out what you want to do with it. So it's one of those things where I understood going into it that the buyer could be a collector. It could be somebody who just wants to complete a set, maybe, for example. They want to work on that. Or it could be somebody who is actually intending to resell. And as long as I'm able to get a price that I deem fair and the transaction is paid for and everything is above board, I really have no issue with that. So again, I don't really care. So for the moment being, there was demand for those particular cards, and there was a buyer on the other end who was willing to pay the price for it. And if they're able to convince somebody else to pay even more for those cards in the future, well, then best of luck to them. Obviously, I was willing to buy the cards at the original price. They were willing to buy at a higher price. Maybe somebody else down the road was willing to pay an even higher price than that. I can't speak to that. Regardless, though, I knew why I bought them. I bought them because it was an opportunity to upgrade a patch, and then in turn, I took the one that was in my collection and I was able to flip it and recuperate some of my money and then some. In a lot of cases, my upgrade was completely paid for as a result of that, which is a win for me as a collector. Going back to the topic at hand, though, because you don't know the real reasons and the real rationale behind why people are buying these things, it becomes very difficult to ascertain. But that doesn't mean that you're going to lack in people trying to make their best guess or trying to make their speculation. So now we're in the era of the pump and dumpers. It's that there's the F1 pump and dumpers. There's the Marvel card pump and dumpers. And it becomes a bit of a purity test of collecting. Like, well, were you collecting those Marvel cards before, or are you somebody who came into it now? The truth is, I, as a longer term collector, I look at it and I say, I don't really care. That doesn't really make a difference to me. That's really up to you. Am I in that market? No. Does it affect me in any way? It doesn't. And a lot of the same people that are complaining the loudest, though, honestly, aren't being affected by that market either. It's just that in a lot of cases where the market is being slow, people are looking for excuses. They're looking for scapegoats. They're looking for this, that, and the other thing, and they're trying to catch somebody. They want to catch somebody red-handed. They want to prove that this person is a pump and dumper. And look, the reality is there are plenty of pump and dumpers. It goes back to what I said a little bit earlier in this discussion. I said, I believe there is some sincere, genuine demand out there for these cards and for these categories. Now, let me follow it up with a secondary question. Do I believe that increase, the organic increase in demand, accounts for all of the price increase? Absolutely not. I do not. I believe that there is very much a concerted effort on some folks to promote, let's say, a lot of these categories in order to try to increase the value of these items that they hold so that they in turn can sell them. But the reality of it is that's no different than any other market or any other category. And in this situation, I have to put the onus back on the consumer. I have to put the onus back on the collector. I have to put the onus back on the people that are looking at purchasing these things and then listening to the advice from these individuals. You can sit here and argue with me, and a lot of people do as far as this is concerned, that, well, it's wrong that they knowingly are trying to pump this thing and saying how great it is and everything when fully knowing that they have stock and inventory. And I'm inclined to agree with you. I totally understand your position on this. But my point is that this is not new. This isn't a recent phenomenon in the hobby. And lest I be accused of just looking the other way as far as this is concerned, my thought process on it is that at a certain point, the consumer does need to take some responsibility in protecting themselves. And by that I mean is, why don't you just look at what the possible rationale is, or more importantly, look at the source of the information that you're getting. You should take it with a grain of salt no matter where it's coming from. And I see this play itself out all the time. Even in the space that I go in here on this channel and on the podcast and all that, I get questions on a semi-regular basis up from people asking, "Oh, do you think this is a good deal, or do you think this is, or do you think this is going to go up?" And I very much as humanly possible, I try to completely skirt or avoid the question. And it's not because I don't have an opinion on it. It's that, like, I don't want the responsibility of telling you what you should and shouldn't buy. I don't want to tell you if it's a good deal or not. That's not my concern. Because the truth is, if the shoe was on the other foot, I wouldn't be asking you. And it's no slight on you. It's just the fact is that I prefer to do my own research and I prefer to figure that information out on my own when it's readily available. And one can argue that, well, it's easy for you to say you've been involved in this for quite a while, buying and selling, collecting, and doing all these things. And that's very true. But there are always opportunities. It's one of those things where there are plenty of times where that experience will be very beneficial. It will be very helpful. It will allow you to be able to see certain things and be able to pick on certain things a little bit quicker. But there's a lot of other times and opportunities where we're kind of on a level playing field. And I'll give you a bit of an example using the wrestling example that I was talking about. One of the things that I'd done on the channel not that long ago was that I did a video where I was discussing the whole idea of working through a new product in a new category or a new genre, and I talked about the inaugural edition of the AEW set from Upper Deck. I got a chance to talk to and discuss with Billy Celio, product manager at Upper Deck, as well as he came on the live stream, and he's been on a couple of times, just hanging out and chatting, just in general terms. But we had a specific conversation about this product. And one of the things that I mentioned on there is that I thought there were some opportunities on a couple of different types of cards, and I gave my rationale and I explained it. I at no point said, "Oh yeah, you guys should go buy that." No, you do whatever you want. Because especially if you're not interested in it, I certainly wouldn't recommend it to you if you're not interested in a genre that you don't care about to go out and buy a bunch of things, especially on somebody else's recommendation. But the point was that I felt that that was an opportunity for a couple of different categories. Number one, it was a new product. And number two, it was a new product from a company that had never done wrestling cards before. So you're getting all the newness. So any comps and any related, any WWE cards or anything wouldn't really apply here. And it's kind of, kind of have to work your way around what the characters are. So you do need to do a little bit of research and take advantage of the sell sheets and do all these things. My thought process was, let me talk through the process of figuring out this information and trying to take it together in order to make your own decision on what you feel like you need to do or what you feel like you should do. But here's the thing. When it comes to this, my experience in the hobby is helpful, yes, but it's almost completely negated by all those unknowns that I talked about. I did a whole discussion on the level of unknowns in this situation. Well, those unknowns are the great equalizer. It means if you're new to the hobby, you have almost no inherent disadvantage here because you have the exact same opportunity that I do to do the exact same research that I did. You can go into that sell sheet. And if you don't understand it, maybe it'll take you a little bit longer to work your way through it. But the point is, you have the exact same opportunity that I do to analyze the exact same information and come to your own personal conclusion. And at that point, you are then able to act with conviction. And here's the thing. Let's say you're wrong. That's tuition. That's a lesson. But at least by going through the process of doing your own research and learning it yourself, you were able to then learn. There is always the benefit of, if you do know, if you have certain, mentors or friends in the hobby who are able to guide you a little bit and give you a little bit of advice to get you off on the right foot, that's not a bad thing. That's certainly a good thing. But the reliance that a lot of people have given into this category is the reason why the quote unquote influencer has become so important. Some people look to these individuals as the beacon of light in the darkness of trying to figure their way around a hobby. While I'm sitting there going like, it's not that dark, guys. It's, it's dusk. We can still work our way around. We don't need a beacon of light out here. Just be very careful where you step and, pay attention to where you're walking and you'll be fine. And it's one of those things where I get frustrated as somebody who's on the receiving end of a lot of these questions, because a lot of these questions sometimes, again, I don't speak necessarily of the live streamer thing, but I'll get the odd question here and there. But sometimes I listen or see, or I'll watch somebody else's live stream and look at the questions, and I sit there like, it would have taken you 2 seconds to go and look that up yourself. And I understand the inclination towards being a little bit lazy as far as it's concerned, but in that case, you got to remember something. When you're asking these people that are on the internet land, on the other side of that YouTube screen or the podcast or whatever the case may be, what makes them any more qualified to be able to tell you what to do than somebody off the street giving you stock tips? Would you go onto a random website and take stock tips from it? You might, but it probably then shouldn't be too surprising if you end up losing your money. It's one of those things where the whole influencer thing, the whole idea of the pumping and dumping, and these categories that may or may not have the organic growth to sustain them, these are all valid concerns and valid questions that people have. But my retort on almost all of this is, so what? Because these things tend to come in cycles. And if it's not F1, if it's not Marvel cards, if it's not wrestling cards, it's going to be something else later on. And the reality is that almost all of these things that go in these cycles come and go. And as they come and go, by the way, there are going to be some legitimate Marvel card collectors who are going to enjoy continuing to collect it after the madness has abided. And the same thing with the F1 collectors. There are some legitimate F1 collectors who are probably enjoying getting those cards. They're going to be annoyed if the price goes down, certainly, but some of them are going to stick around and keep collecting, even if the craze kind of dies off. And the same thing with the other categories. It's one of those things where there's always going to be a collecting core, a collecting base in a lot of these things. And there's always going to be a little bit of speculative base, because even if the prices go down, that doesn't mean that you can't buy something at a lower price and sell it for a higher price. It just, the margins will be a little bit narrower. That's how things were when the hobby was a little bit quieter in the late 90s and the early 2000s. It didn't mean that people weren't buying and selling profitably. Yes, they were. I was there, and I assure you, I was able to buy some stuff and sell some stuff at a small profit. But the margins were small. What you weren't likely to 5x or 10x. That was the big differentiator. Is that there wasn't these crazy huge markups. It wasn't this thing where you were worrying about making these massive dollars. Everything was relatively smaller dollars wise. As we go into the current state, heading into the spring of 2022, is hopefully in the next month or two. It doesn't feel like it if I go outside today. But as we start heading into the spring and into the summer of 2022, my big thought process is that I do find it very interesting the amount of content creators that have now taken onto the tack of being of trying to police or trying to protect the hobby from these horrifically bad actors. Where, to be clear, there are definitely some bad actors out there, but they have always been there. And it's one of those things where the best line of defense is simply education. The best line of defense that I can offer you is scrutinize more carefully where you're getting this advice from. Even the people that are quote unquote trying to protect you, they're speaking in these grandiose statements. It's like, well, just understand that you're not really doing that much more as far as, trying to identify these bad actors. You're sitting there going like, we got to name them. We got to name them and shame them. It's like, okay, great. So you realize that you probably could have accomplished almost the same things simply by educating the individuals on what to look for. You could have accomplished almost the same thing by saying, look, stop taking advice from people on the internet that you don't really know about categories you have no understanding in, because you haven't been willing to put in the time to learn it yourself. I would recommend, and here's where I will offer some advice, and that is this. If you want to enter into a new category, there is no harm in asking some questions. There is no harm in trying to get the baseline and trying to get a base understanding of the lay of the land. But while you do that, I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that while you're doing that, you do a little bit of your own reading, your own research. Go look up some of those comps. Go look up some of those sets. Go figure out what's limited and what isn't limited, because a lot of times you can figure that out with a couple of good Google searches before you even ask your first question. And then you're at least a little bit more informed when you're asking your questions. More informed questions lead to slightly better answers, because then very quickly you'll be able to figure out which one of these so-called experts and influencers inside of this space actually know what the hell they're talking about. How many of them are actually speaking in these terms with all this great experience of all of 10 minutes of their own research? Well, they're 10 minutes ahead of you, so they know more than you do, therefore they're experts. It's a very low bar we're talking about. Now, I know I've been a little bit rambly on this one, so I'm going to wind her down here. But please understand that my main point in this particular episode is just trying to talk through the whole idea of, insert category here. I used F1 as an example. I used Marvel cards as an example because they're the current ones that seem to be, at the front of people's minds in this category. But rest assured, as soon as those subside, there'll be something else. There'll be a different category that somebody will say, "Oh, nobody actually likes those cards. It's just for the money." This will always be rinse and repeated, and it has always been rinse and repeated. And when one sport is a little bit down for a while, somebody will go, "Oh, there's an opportunity. Go buy." And if the prices suddenly go up, a couple of people will be attracted and interested. They'll shift over. The prices will go up. "Oh man, you guys are pumping it. You guys are pumping it." This accusation will be there as long as people are out there to discuss it. You just have to understand that and understand that it is part of the regular cycles. The only thing you can do as far as yourself as an individual, as a consumer, is educate yourself the best you can. And if you are able to educate yourself the best you can, if you're able to find people who have a little bit of understanding in that and are able to ask carefully worded and thoughtful questions, you'll probably get more useful information than asking somebody to give you the 101 on a certain category. Because if you're asking for the 101, it means you weren't willing to put in the time and put in the effort to arm yourself properly so that you can avoid being influenced by the influencers. It only works if you actually don't understand what's going on and you just go blindly what somebody else is telling you. Well, if you go blindly in the direction of what somebody else is telling you to do, then to be blunt, you deserve what you get, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not going to feel that sorry for you. And I'm not the only one. Even if everybody else won't say it, I'm not going to feel sorry for you. And there's going to be a bunch of us that won't feel sorry for you because we were in the same boat that you were once upon a time. And we didn't necessarily have the resources that you have at this point, and we didn't rely on somebody else to tell us. Yes, experience is a great teacher. Yes, those of us who have been around in this longer are going to have a decided advantage in that category. But as I said earlier, you can actually learn quite a bit, at least enough to make yourself safe in a very short period of time. And then armed with a basic understanding of what to look out for, you'll already be better served than 95% of the people around you. So hopefully that's something that I said there was at least somewhat helpful. And by all means, if you've got any questions and you're checking it out on the YouTube version, feel free to throw something in the comments. I'd love to get your opinion on it. If you're checking it out on the strictly audio version in the podcast, if you could leave a rating for the podcast, that's always very helpful. These episodes, again, are going to come out very sporadically, just depending on when I get an idea of something specific that I want to do that doesn't necessitate a visual aid. Otherwise, everything else is going to be on the Because I'm Carlos YouTube page because that's the hub for all my content anyway. Anyway, that's it for me. If you are checking out the YouTube version, like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.